My guest this morning is a lady of many parts. We will work backwards in the sense that we'll start with what she's doing now and then look back at all the things she's done. Sue Arnold, good morning and welcome. She is the Assistant Police and Crime Commissioner for Staffordshire. How do you get a job like that, I wonder?
That's a very interesting question, Bob, because it's a job that I never envisaged that I would have 3.5 years ago. The first Police and Crime Commissioner elections were in November 2012. They were obviously unique, a brand new position that had been created by the Conservative government. And our candidate was a guy called Matthew Ellis, who's the Police and Crime Commissioner for Staffordshire. Obviously, I became politically interested in the role and what it stood for. And Matthew invited me to be his Deputy Police and Crime Commissioner. So I knew nothing really of what a Deputy Police and Crime Commissioner did. And probably, like most police and crime commissioners, we were all pretty unsure as to where that role would lead.
Because it's a sort of political role with a small p. It's not a police role. You're almost a liaison between the two, aren't you?
We are fundamentally accountable to the electorate in Staffordshire. And our budget in Staffordshire is approximately £195 million. And we want to make sure that we spend that £195 million on the best policing that we can in the areas that we represent. So we will hold the police to account on behalf of the public. And Matthew has written a police and crime plan, a 6-year police and crime plan, in conjunction with the public, and we will deliver that plan, and we commission the police, really, to deliver that plan.
Because it's not like the sort of system in America, is it, where the police chiefs are elected in the way that they are. But there is a move in this country towards them perhaps being more accountable and perhaps be elected and similarly, obviously, face the prospect of losing their job.
I think that transparency is vital in policing. And certainly I know that in Staffordshire and probably many other areas, that transparency hasn't been in the face of the public. So, for instance, in each of the areas that we represent, what we call local policing teams, like Lichfield, Stafford, Newcastle under Lyme, we have neighbourhood panels. So there will be members of the public that will come onto a neighbourhood panel and will hold their local commander to account on the crime statistics in the area, and will discuss what is important to their particular area.
I mean, obviously going into something like this, a whole new world, an eye-opener in every sense. What's the biggest single thing that surprised you when you got involved?
Gosh, there were many, many challenges, Bob. For me, I'm a businesswoman first and foremost, and it was all about making sure that we spent the money that we had, the taxpayers' money, in the most efficient way. It's not just about how much money you've got, it's how well that you spend it. So that was a challenge. I had to think very much that if it was my money, my taxpayers' money, we want to make sure we get as much benefit as we can for every pound that we spend. And there were challenges to that. There'd been no reform in policing for many, many years. So all of a sudden, to be accountable to an elected member, you know, that transition took a little while, but we have a fantastic relationship with our Chief Constable. It's challenging and demanding, but everybody respects each other, and we all have the same goal, to make sure we have a really safe Staffordshire.
So when you're sitting in meetings, yourself and Matthew, with the Chief, are you sitting at sort of opposite ends of the table, eyeing each other up and thinking, right, how's this going to go? I know what they're going to ask me. I know what the answer is I'm going to get.
At times, yes. For instance, we've just appointed a new Assistant Chief Constable. And I have a portfolio at the police, so I predominantly focus on victims, new types of crime, cyber, vulnerable victims, FGM, domestic abuse. So I will say to the Assistant Chief Constable, we've implemented a particular strategy and it's not working as well as it should because of areas of policing in terms of maybe some slight blockages. So the Assistant Chief Constable will do his very best to make sure there is a smooth transition to delivering that plan. So I wouldn't say that we do it in a way which is confrontational. but it can be, at times, challenging conversations.
Yeah, because I can imagine that they will say, they'll be sitting there saying, I've been in the police for 30 years, I know what works, I know how it works, you've been here 5 minutes. I'm probably being harsh, but you know the point I'm making.
I do, but we all have to be innovative. You know, in an era where austerity is still tight and public spending is diminishing, we have to do more for less. If you take the technology at Staffordshire, for instance, it was old, it was fragmented, there was no cohesion. What we have done is spent the money in a way that will make a police officer's life much more efficient. So, for instance, the officers in Staffordshire have got mobile technology. So instead of coming back to a police station to maybe make up the statements or to check a record, they can do that whilst they're actually out there with the offender or the victim. And that has released the equivalent of an extra 100 officers in terms of police time.
Because their complaint always is about having to go back and spend time doing the paperwork.
Bureaucracy.
Yeah.
That's what a police and crime commissioner is there to do. So we've reduced that bureaucracy. And Matthew started very well in the fact that the first people he spoke to were the officers themselves and nobody above the rank of sergeant. So we said, come on, guys,
that's the way to do it, isn't it?
It is.
OK. The tendency always was with the police that people, that they concentrated not so much on victims, did they? It was all about offenders. That's something that has to change, surely.
Yes, Bob, and it has, and it continues to do so. When we first took office 3.5 years ago, part of my portfolio is victims, and really turning the tables to the focus on the victim and not the offender. I remember quite vividly in Lichfield where a lady who owned a dress shop, for instance, yet again had had the facade broken into, and the police did arrest the perpetrator. And the poor lady was on her hands and knees, it was a beautiful dress shop, picking up the bits and pieces. And she said to the police officer, you know, where's the offender in this? I'm on my hands and knees, I'm the victim. Cleaning up the mess, and he's arrested and in a very warm cell. You know, what about compensation for me and support for me? So I'm very pleased to say that when we came to office, only 23,000 victims had the offer of support in Staffordshire. I've now taken that up to 55,000. So every victim will have a sense of being cared for. And we've implemented what I call a victim gateway, so there's a lot of cohesion around it. So if maybe you're a victim of domestic abuse, or a victim of FGM, or a vulnerable old lady that's had a shed broken into, everybody has different needs, and this gateway will triage your needs and make sure that you get the support you need. So we're really, really thrilled about the success of that gateway and that every victim is now being supported in a way that's needed.
Sounds like you're enjoying this job.
I love it. I love it every day. It's a challenge every day. And for me, it's about doing the right thing. It's not about money. I get paid quite a small salary for the amount of work that I do. It's about wanting to represent the community in which we serve. And probably that's where I'm a little bit different. I'm a politico that wants to do the right thing, and for that there are rewards, and that is job satisfaction and helping people.
And of course you had a little bit of a break, didn't you, last year?
I did.
When you stood for Parliament. How was it? Talking of challenging jobs, what was that like?
Probably one of the biggest challenges of my life, thoroughly enjoyable. It was wonderful to be back in Walsall, the town of my birth and where I grew up and where my first business was, the Walsall Advertiser. So it was truly tremendous to reconnect with people in the town. It's a town, obviously, that's changed over the years. The demographics are very different. It's been a Labour seat for 45 years, but you know, Bob...
That was a challenge.
I kind of felt if anybody could change that, it would be me. But the UKIP vote certainly made a big impact, and they were probably previous Conservative voters that voted UKIP. But one that I wouldn't change, and thoroughly enjoyed it. And I made some great friends in Walsall, so hi everybody to all my friends in Walsall.
And in 2020, will you have another go, do you think?
Well, I'll face 2020 a little bit nearer the time. We've got the election in May for Matthew, the Police and Crime Commissioner. He's invited me to stay on as his deputy if he succeeds in winning his post back, so I've committed to that for the time being.
And for those who don't know, it's an interesting fact, this in your previous life, of course, you were a newspaper editor, weren't you?
Well, I was a newspaper owner, editor, saleswoman, accountant, running a small business in the 80s and the 90s. That's what you did. And we were one of the very first free newspapers that launched with still a friend of mine, a guy called Tim Watts, who owns the Pertemps Group. And they were halcyon days, really. And it was the Walsall Observer, which was the paid-for newspaper, which had a monopoly. Tim Watts, being a recruitment man, didn't like the rates that they were charging, so he said, come on, let's launch our own paper and we can place our own advertising in our own paper. And they say the rest is history. We became a FTSE 100 company. I ended up being chief executive of 56 newspapers, 3 print centres across the UK. So I'm a newspaper girl and woman.
Yeah. And just a thought, I mean, presumably that has been quite useful to have that at the back with the job you're now doing as Assistant Police and Crime Commissioner.
Yeah, very much so, because for me, it's all about the community. And I was a community newspaper publisher. So, for instance, we always found in the newspapers, if you had locally the Conservatives in power, then the newspaper would always give a different perspective.
We have to leave it there and go to the break. Sue Arnold, thanks for being with me.